All set.
All right, well, good afternoon, everyone. My name is Kelsey Linville, and I am the Bureau Chief of Adults with Mental Illness and Co-occurring Disorders for the Indiana Division of Mental Health and Addiction. Before we get started today, I would like to cover a few housekeeping items. Because of the large audience today, your microphones are muted. If you do have any questions throughout today's session related to content, or if you're having any trouble with the audio, please use the chat box to ask those questions. You can access the chat box through the navigation bar, which if you hover towards the bottom of your screen will appear. Also, through the navigation bar, you can access closed captioning by clicking the button that says CC. We are very excited to have you all join us today for this incredibly important topic, and on one of the final days of Disability Employment Awareness Month. So happy Awareness Month to all of you. As background and overall context to today's training, you should know that the Division of Mental Health and Addiction, or DMHA, and Vocational Rehabilitation, or VR, have been working together on how to improve employment outcomes for individuals with mental health diagnoses. We recognize that employment has positive impacts on well-being and overall health, and that unemployment negatively affects multiple life domains. As such, employment is a health intervention, and one that could benefit at least 85% of people with mental health diagnoses within our public system nationally. We know that what we've been doing up to this point leaves a lot of room for improvement, and we would like to move towards implementation of the gold standard evidence-based practice for this population, individual placement and support. A critical priority for the U.S. Department of Labor, Office of Disability Employment Policy, or ODEP, is to invest in systems change efforts that result in increased community-based integrated employment opportunities for individuals with significant disabilities. To advance that priority, ODEP sponsored the Voice Training and Technical Assistance Award, VOICE standing for Visionary Opportunities to Increase Competitive Employment. This year's VOICE project focuses specifically on individuals with mental health disabilities. Indiana applied and received the maximum award of 300 hours working with subject matter experts. With our 4 subject matter experts, we in Indiana are centering our activities on guiding our thinking in how to shift from a medical model of treatment to a recovery model that includes employment as an integral part of wellness. While providers around the state do approach treatment through a recovery model lens, sometimes employment is an area where the medical model continues to have a foothold. We can think we know what's best for those we serve instead of allowing them dignity of risk. Rather than helping clients get well so they can then achieve their goal of working can actually be an intervention that propels people forward in successfully managing their symptoms. The VOICE project is bringing multiple state agencies to the table so we can reduce barriers to making that a reality for as many people as possible. Shortly, you will hear from Teresa Brandenburg, one of the 4 subject matter experts with whom we've had the opportunity to collaborate this year. Teresa has extensive experience with individual placement and support in the field, as a trainer, and at the systems level. IPS is a specific model of supported employment for individuals who have a serious mental illness, and is the most highly researched and has proven effective outcomes. Through JARMA, which is DMHA's data registry, we see that Indiana is consistent with the national data in that approximately 3/4 of adults served through our public mental health treatment system are not employed. Yet, research also shows that the majority of individuals with mental illness want to work, and we know it's a valuable part of overall wellness. I'm now going to turn it over to Teresa to share some vocational rehabilitation data that illustrates more of the context within our state.
Good afternoon. I'm Teresa Colazar, Director of the Indiana Bureau of Rehabilitation Services, which houses the state's Vocational Rehabilitation, or VR, program. In review of the VR data, we saw some similar trends to the DMHA data that Kelsey just presented. Of those individuals who received services through VR, roughly over the last 5 years, about 1/4 exit VR with employment, while the remainder exit without employment. So of those who were closed with successful employment, Most work 16 hours or more, with almost half working 21 hours or more. So in review of this data, we identified a few takeaways. Most Hoosiers with mental health disabilities are not employed or not accessing employment. But those who are working, they often work more than 20 hours per week. Services as they are provided today may not be effective for many individuals with mental health diagnosis in terms of achieving employment. And there is more need for more effective integration of mental health treatment and employment services. I think it's fair to say that there is room for improvement. Before we learn about IPS today, I want to briefly share this chart, which shows the successful track record of IPS. Across 28 separate studies, IPS resulted in better outcomes than other employment approaches, in many cases showing twice as much success. The overall mean competitive employment rate was 56% for IPS and 23% for controls. So the case for IPS is quite strong, but we need to continue to lay a foundation to support IPS in Indiana. A part of this, of course, will be identifying solutions for adequately funding IPS. We don't have all the answers quite yet on what those solutions are for Indiana. However, we wanted to share this graphic, which outlines the main sources of funding for IPS in states that have successfully implemented this evidence-based approach to supported employment. State vocational rehabilitation programs, Medicaid, and departments of health are typically the primary contributors. I'm pleased to share that all three agencies in Indiana are currently at the table to review our individual practices and current funding structures, with the goal of identifying ways to better braid and sequence existing dollars. Our featured presenter and IPS subject matter expert today is Teresa Brandenburg, a certified rehabilitation counselor and substance use counselor. Teresa has boots on the ground experience in implementing IPS in Kentucky about 10 years ago, working closely with both Kentucky VR and the Department of Behavioral Health. Over the past few years, Teresa has served as an IPS trainer and subject matter expert, working with states like Indiana to implement this evidence-based approach to supported employment. As you hear from Teresa today, you will undoubtedly have questions about what this means for Indiana and how Indiana is going to make this work, and hopefully questions about what are next steps and how you can get involved. While again, we don't have answers to all of those questions, we are making progress in that direction, which we'll touch on later in the presentation. For now, please use today's training to learn about IPS and help us to create awareness around the importance of working toward adopting IPS in Indiana. Consider your agency's interest as a possible pilot site as a key step toward implementation of IPS. Through a pilot, we will also be focused on identifying best practices in effectively braiding and sequencing funding to better support individuals with mental health diagnosis in achieving employment success. There's no set date for a pilot at this point, but we will know more in the coming months as we learn about future opportunities from DOL regarding the VOICE project, and are hopeful there will be another round of technical assistance to help further advance us toward the goal of implementing IPS. Without further ado, we are ready to turn it over to our featured presenter, Teresa Brandenburg.
Hi, this is Teresa Brandenburg, and I am an IPS trainer for the state of Kentucky. And today we're going to do an overview and just give you an idea of what IPS is, how it works. It's going to take probably about an hour and 15 minutes usually for this presentation. All right, I want to start with a video of a consumer that was from Kentucky who actually wrote a supported employment rap. It's really pretty cool, and I thought that would be a great way to kind of kick off this presentation.
This is a rap about supported employment. I made it up for your end. And although I've already got me a job now, I believe my people can help you out somehow. So here's a little about my story and me. I got me a job working Best Buy, DC. Now I'm reppin' DC 1376. My job coach Sheila got me a situational fix. You see, I was jobless and needed some dough, but now I get paid and work is where I flow. Enough about me, yeah, I know. So let's get back to you and see what my people can do. I like to start off with the serious steps. Is that okay? So just give it a shot before you say no way. Step 1, get off the couch, get out your PJs, put in some applications and do this the right way. Clean up, fix up, sit up straight. Speak up, speak out, you should articulate. Step 2 should probably be step 1. Organize your resume, son, we just begun. Step 3, meet with the job coach at a regular time. Are you getting all this, or am I wasting my rhyme? Step 4, aim for success. I know you can do it, just give it your best. And after all, I'm an example of what you can achieve. So don't give up, friend. Just believe you can do it. Like I said, that's all there is to it. Just believe. Just believe in yourself. Just believe.
I thought that would be a good way to kick off the presentation here. He was one of our first IPS placements here in Kentucky, and he's working at a distribution center by Best Buy in Shepherdsville, and he's got a lot of talent with that route, so we really appreciate him. All right, on today's presentation, this is what I'm going to I hope to achieve. We're going to go over an overview of IPS and just kind of give you a broad idea of what it is about. We'll talk about some of the expectations of IPS programs while we're doing this. We're going to talk about what's so special about IPS and why it works, and that people with mental illness want to work. And then we're going to look at maybe what the next steps are, pilot projects and early adopters, what that might look like. All right, now here's my supported employment philosophy, and it's always been this: the belief that regardless of disability, everyone can work. And I believe that. I don't care what type of disability somebody has. If they want to work, there's a job out there for them. And as an employment specialist, it's your job to find it. Now, if you don't have that belief, then you may want to rethink what you're doing, because you really have to have that belief, because you're selling people to employers is basically what you're doing on their skills. Our primary goal is not to change people, but to make a natural fit between the person's strengths and experiences and jobs in the community. So we're matching people with jobs. We're not slotting them into jobs. We're not going, oh, well, I got a good relationship over here with this employer, so I know I can get them on here, even though that's not really what they want to do. No, we want to match them with jobs, because let's face it, if they don't like the job, they're not going to stick with it. And I'm sure every one of us has had a job that we didn't like. And I doubt very seriously that we're still in it right now. We have found, by this time, we've found us something that we like and that what we're doing. I love this cartoon. It really states the nature of employment specialists and people. Because here's Linus. I would hate to have a job where you had to get up early in the morning. And I know some people like that, they don't function well early in the morning. So with somebody like that, you would want to look at maybe an afternoon shift or even a night shift to see that would suit them better. And Charlie Brown, I'd hate to have a job where you had to stay in the same place every day. Oh gosh, me too. I hate staying in the same place. I have traveled with my job for my past job that I retired from for over 20 years. So it's really hard for me to stay in place. I've traveled with this job. And so this COVID, where I'm having to stay home, has been really kind of hard on me, because I'm used to getting out and going. And then here's Lucy. I would hate to have a job where you had to be nice to everybody. So, Lucy would not be appropriate for a customer service position. You would want to put her maybe somewhere where she's working more alone or with just a few people. So just kind of keep that in mind. You really need to keep in mind about what people's preferences are and what they want to do.
Good afternoon. My name is Leah Vincent. I'm with the Level Up Indiana Employment Specialist Initiative, and we're going to take a moment for a quick poll. Maya, can you pull up the poll? Okay, what percentage of adults with mental illness want to work? We have 15%, 32%. I don't need to go on. Looks like everyone so far is voting.
Leah, just a quick report out. It looks like about 75% of folks have voted so far, so we can give just one more moment and then I'll close the poll.
Okay, thank you.
All right, and I'm going to go ahead and close it.
All right. It looks like about 79% of people chose 66% and a few chose 47% and 32%. Okay, so obviously the right answer is 66%. So what is one of the most common questions that people ask you when you first meet them? Where do you work? Many conversations at family and friends gatherings are centered around people's jobs. Maybe people stop going around their friends and family because of that. Imagine how isolating that could actually make someone feel. Now we're going to get back to the presentation where Teresa is going to discuss why there's a need for IPS.
So why is there a need for IPS? Well, 66% of adults with mental illness want to work. Only about 20% are working, and only 2% have access to employment services. Now, this is a national statistics, but if you check the percentages with Indiana, it's going to be pretty close to the same. It may vary a little bit one way or the other, but it's going to be pretty close to the same. And I think it's sad that when we had that many people that want to go to work, but only 2% of them have access to employment services. And it's been proven over and over again, if they have access to those employment services, they're going to be more successful. Now, since we're talking about data here, I wanted to go in and throw a little Kentucky data in here with COVID and non-COVID too. This is data that you collect, and we collect each year, each month, each quarter, and we send to Westat of IPS. Now, this is an overall one of Kentucky, but you would send in each your individual ones of this. So in January, March for 2020, we served 786 people. We had 254 working, 18 in schools. We enrolled 196 new people. We had 95 job starts. So we had 32% working. Now keep that in mind. Remember this, 95 job starts, 32% working. That's the first quarter where COVID wasn't involved. Second quarter, I call it our COVID quarter. You know, when it first happened, we wondered how it was going to affect our data and how people were going to get jobs or whatever. But what we found is even during COVID, there are a lot of jobs out there to be found, and people get jobs. So we served 691, almost the same amount. But look here, job starts, 87. The prior quarter was 95. So we had less than 10 more job starts. So, you know, that's so that would be 8 less, right? 8 less job starts. And then we had 31% working. So it really did not affect our data very much at all, COVID. And we're still seeing people get jobs all the time. I expect the next quarterly data will be even better than this. So, okay, let's talk about what IPS is. Individual placement and support is a model of support employment that for people with serious mental illness. So this is people with schizophrenia, people with major depression, bipolar. They're living with these behavioral health conditions and they want a regular job and they can work at a regular job. And there are a lot of variations of supported employment. And this one is evidence-based. It's the only evidence-based supported employment program, and it's geared to those with mental health disorders or behavioral health disorders and co-occurring disorders. So, and sometimes educational and technical training can be a part of that to advance career paths. It just depends on your program. All right, we're going to talk a little bit about the history of IPS. Way back in the 90s, they started doing all this research on IPS and how the best way it would be to help people with behavioral health issues go to work. And they finalized it with 27 randomized control trials that showed a significant advantage for the IPS program. In every one of them, it showed a significant advantage. So this was kind of the birth of IPS at this point in time. It began at Dartmouth University, and then it's transitioned over to Westat in about 2015, 2016. While it was at Dartmouth, it was sponsored by Johnson & Johnson, which Foundation, which you know is a major corporation. And in about 2015, they decided to go in another different direction. So at that point in time, it transitioned over to Westat, which is a professional organization that works with contracts with governments and things like that. They have an international collaborative, and it began with 3 sites in 2001. As of 2020, we have grown to 24 U.S. states and regions and 6 countries. So it's truly an international program. And it has been shown to work with these, doing the same things. It's shown to work in those 6 countries as well.
So speaking of other countries who are implementing IPS, I've recently had the opportunity to be in a Zoom room with people from Finland and France who are also implementing the IPS model. It was very interesting to hear that there's a lot of similar stories from country to country when working with individuals using the IPS employment model. Also, Debbie Becker, the director of the IPS learning community, just shared with me that they're in the process of converting the fidelity manuals and training materials into Hebrew for those in Israel who are interested in implementing IPS. Just a fun fact. Now we are going to take another poll. Okay, true or false? IPS is more effective than other vocational approaches.
Okay, I'm going to give everybody just one more moment to enter in their answer, and you have to press the button at the bottom of your screen or at the bottom of the poll to enter the question in. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and end the poll.
Okay. All right, we had 97% of the responses true, and we did have 3% that said false. Okay, so the correct answer is true. All right, IPS is more effective than regular approaches. All right, we're going to go back to the presentation.
Now, this is what the IPS studies show. People that receive IPS services are 3 times as likely to go to work and have employment, and it's faster. Their jobs are held longer, and they're 4 times as likely to work more hours, and it's been proven to be a more effective alternative vocational approach. So this is, I mean, it's been studied, the documents out there, the evidence is out there about this. Some of the characteristics of IPS are it's an evidence-based practice. That's what we already talked about. They did all those randomized controls and all the studies and the testing that they have to do to prove it. So it's evidence-based. We know that it works. The practitioner focuses on the person's strengths. So they're going to match that person with the job. They're going to look at their strengths, not what they're looking at what they can do, not what they can't do. And then work promotes recovery and wellness. We know this. You know, work is good for us, and it's it's normalcy. So it's what we do. So it just goes in that role with recovery. IPS uses a multidisciplinary team approach. And by this, the IPS employment specialist is in a treatment team within the agency. So on that treatment team, there may be a psychiatrist or a clinician, case manager, prescriber, peer support, and these teams meet weekly to discuss cases. And we want that employment specialist should be embedded in that team and be just as much a part of the team as the clinician or as the case manager or anybody else on that team. And we want them to be able where they can speak up, and if some of their staff in a case and it may not be their client, it may be something that they think work may help. they may ask that clinician, well, have you thought about referring them to us? Maybe work would help with that, with them. So, and just kind of reminding them that they're there. But they also can use that multidisciplinary team approach, because if they're having a trouble with somebody, maybe with coping skills, they can ask that therapist, can you help me develop some coping skills for this person on the job and what we need to do? So it is really a team approach. Services are also individualized, and they last as long as the person wants or needs them. So everybody is an individual, and nobody is going to need the same type of supports that everybody else does. So even if you have the same diagnosis, say if you have two people that have schizophrenia, it's going to manifest in different ways, and they're going to need different supports because they're different people. So you want to be sure that you look at the person and individualize those supports to help them be the best success they can be. And the IPS approach really changes the way mental health services are delivered, because in the past, work was never thought about until they were work ready or they had gone down this path. But now IPS is thought about whether they're symptomatic, whether they're taking their medications, whether they're participating in therapy, whether they're using. That's all part of the IPS approach. We'll work with all of them as long as they say they want to work. Now, here are some key concepts to IPS. It's rapid pace, so it's very fast. So from the time that the employment specialist takes an intake on that person, the goal is to have that employment specialist looking for that person a job within 30 days. So that doesn't necessarily mean you have to go and apply for a job in 30 days, but what we look at is, are you doing some job development activities? So maybe you're still kind of in the assessment phase and learning about that person, but maybe you know that person really likes to work with animals. So you might be going to a vet's office and finding out about jobs that they may have available. You wouldn't necessarily be talking about that person, mentioning that person's name or that you have somebody, but just in general finding out some information for that client. And that could count as a job development activity. You want to have client interest. As long as the client is interested, they'll work. It's when if they don't have an interest, that's when you have an issue, because if they don't want to work, you're not going to get them to work. But as long as they want to work, they'll work. It's also client-centered. So it's also centered around what that client wants and what that client feels is an appropriate job for them, or what the job that they want, rather than what the employment specialist feels or the therapist or somebody else thinks. It's what the client wants. We're looking at competitive employment. So that's any job that's out in the community that anybody else can apply for. It doesn't matter. It doesn't matter what job it is, as long as it's a competitive job. Now, jobs that are set aside with disabilities are not considered competitive employment. So it's not some minimum wage. And I know there are some jobs that pay competitive wages, but they're set aside for people with disabilities. Those don't count either. And then we look at time and limited job supports. That's because you never know how long that person's going to need job supports. So the job supports are there for as long as that person needs them. And I love these quotes. What people want most is a job, a car, and a date on Friday night. That was Pat Dagan said that. So, what better way to be able to have a car and a date on a Friday night is to have that job. So that's why that's one of the reasons most people want it. It's a normal thing to do, to go out on a Friday night in your car. And then this one, if you think work is stressful, you should try unemployment. And I think with COVID coming along this last few months, we can all attest to how stressful unemployment can be from people that we know, and that maybe in even some of our clients. Now, what is recovery? Recovery is a process in which people want to live, work, and participate in their communities. So it's a whole process. It's not just one thing of this or that. So it's a way for getting them to be able to live and work in their communities and learn from their jobs, from other people, and how to participate in their communities and be able to participate in their communities, which maybe they've always wanted to do some acting and they get involved in their local theater, or just going out to festivals and going to the movies and going out to the mall shopping. That can all be considered participating in their communities and can be part of recovery. So recovery and employment. what it does is just gives you that sense of normalcy, just what I talked about, being able to go out and go to the movies or go to the mall, go out to eat. And with that sense of normalcy, to be able to do all those things, you have to have somewhat of a financial source. And some of our clients that are living on fixed incomes that are SSDI or SSI based, or just some funds through the state where they're getting housing subsidies and such, they may not have that extra money to go out and do things that they want to do. And so this is a way to have that financial incentive to be able to do that. Social interaction. A job is a big part of social interaction. And if you didn't realize it now, you should have realized it back in March and April when most of us were confined to our homes, because I really miss that social interaction of work, of seeing people. And it was, even though we were able to see people like this through Zoom, it's not the same thing as being there and being in person. So social interaction on the job is very important for the person's mental health. And then just being a part of the community, being a part of being a part of a bigger part I've really never been a part of before. Be really big for people. And it gives them structure. You know, you want to have structure. If we didn't have structure in our life, how would we function? You know, you think we have a couple of days a week, Saturday and Sunday, most of us, that, you know, we don't have a whole lot of structure that day, but we might have some. But throughout the week, when we're working, we pretty much have our days pretty much structured. And that really helps people recovery to have that structure, especially if they have a substance use disorder problem. That structure can really help them into not using substances because they've got to do this, this, and this. Being productive, you know, that just boosts your self-esteem right there when you feel like you're a productive part of a team and part of a business, and that, yes, I helped this person, or I did this all by myself. Being productive makes you feel so good. And it contributes to all aspects of their life. So it's going to fall all over in that. Once they feel productive and you got the self-esteem built up and structure, you're going to see their whole life transform. And it gives them independence. And let's face it, we all need, you know, independence. Now, sometimes if they have caregivers, that may give them a little pause for worry, but we want everybody to be dependent and be able to exercise that independence. Now we're going to watch a video about recovery and employment. This is a person with a substance use disorder that is in recovery and employment, and how employment has affected her in a positive way. So we see how that, you know.
All right, just a second. I'm going to pull up that video for us.
My name's Jeannie, and I have a substance abuse problem and a mental illness. I started using alcohol, of course, when I was around 13, graduated to marijuana, and at the age of 20, I went on to heroin. Later on in life, I was diagnosed with bipolar disorder.
Hi, my name's Pam.
Hi, Pam. The integrated program was the best thing that had ever happened to me. And one of the goals that I chose for myself was to go back to work and to become employable again. The supported employment program helped me to get employment by giving me an employment specialist who worked closely with me. She helped me write my resume, helped me with some interviewing skills. Through that, I gained employment. It was a technical job in a hospital, and it was in the patient equipment repair department. And my employment specialist was right there all the time, helping me to go through these phases. I believe that getting a job and being successful, keeping the job, helped me in my recovery by making me feel like I was a productive human being. After a while, I didn't want to have that abuse problem anymore because I wanted to get up and be 100%. Having a job in recovery is really important. It's to take up some of that idle time, and you don't have a me situation where you're constantly thinking about you. You're out in the world, and it's a good feeling. It's a real good feeling to be productive.
All right, we're going to pause here, and we are going to have some small group discussions on how you have personally seen how recovery and employment work together. The discussions are going to be very casual. Each group will have its own facilitator. Let's see. Sorry, I thought I was on mute. Okay, thank you. Each group will have its own facilitator that will announce themselves once they get into the group. The facilitator will be in charge of taking the notes and will present the information when we get back together. All right, so Maya's going to go ahead and put people into groups, and I believe you're going to have to accept to be into the group.
Just a moment, just a note. So I'm going to open all of the rooms, and you'll get that notification that Leah just mentioned. Breakout sessions will be 10 minutes long. And at 8 minutes, when you have 2 minutes left, there will be a notification that says that the room is closing in 2 minutes, and it'll give you a countdown, but you don't have to leave until the 2 minutes is up. Okay, enjoy your small group discussions.
It also could be when I went to go leave the break room, I almost left the meeting.
Okay.
Thank goodness I stopped myself.
Well, Leah, I think we can go ahead and get started.
Okay, so I hope the discussions went well. And as I said, those who were facilitated and took notes are going to be the presenters. So let's get started with our first one. Maya, would you like to start?
Sure. So we had a really nice discussion and talked about at each different provider level some of the different benefits that folks had seen for people with mental health conditions who were working. And Robert shared that he had seen increased confidence, reduced substance use, and that it also helped people maintain their medication schedules when they were going back to work, and mentioned that it was kind of like a motivation. Maybe in the past they had seen what can happen if you go off your medication schedule, and they wanted to make sure that they were successful, and so they were keeping up with it. So that's awesome. And that it also motivated others. At the organization, he has a clubhouse program, so other folks seeing an individual going to work was extra motivation for others to see the benefits, which is cool. Other folks commented that it helped people have a daily purpose, that people felt valued, and that it helped to reduce symptoms while working, which was pretty cool too.
Thank you. So in my group, we had Allison sharing that they used to have a housing and employment division, and the program that their individuals worked with, they found that the community had a pretty high resistance to their program. So they started working in-house and getting people, people got their feet wet and eased into getting jobs. And it seemed like once they made that connection that they were more comfortable working with, after working with their employment specialists. And they, like, as you said, it's very similar, that they were getting up to take their meds. They were being more independent and getting ready to go each morning. And then we had Kathleen talking about that there was an individual who had multiple jobs and was in mental health recovery and had lost a job and ended up having to go to medical treatment, and then ended up getting kicked out of the treatment because wanted to focus more on video games than his recovery. So when he got back out, mom and dad kind of, said, you have to get a job, you have to get a job. Those first 2 jobs were unsuccessful, but then it was agreed that the employment specialist could work with them and really find that good fit for the job, something that, he was interested in. And that's all it took. And she shared that this individual is still working full time and has benefits and still plays video games, but not as much. Okay, let's see. Teresa, would you like to go over your groups?
Sure. Yes, I'm pretty sure I had the best group, just saying. So yeah, everyone had a lot of great stuff to share. We kind of started with a really good specific success story of an individual who was having some, not to go into great detail, but a lot of challenges with her relationship and didn't really have anything kind of for herself. And so she saw employment as helping her with that sense of individuality and just, something just for her, and ended up getting that job and just thriving. And that kind of led to another example where an individual had a very sad, unfortunate, the death of her father in her life. And as sad as it was, that was also a motivator for her to to get a job. And so she saw employment as a positive, and was able to be successful even when she had not been in prior attempts. And so that led to a connect of employment, as part of recovery, as well as that meeting people where they are and engaging people when they're ready to be engaged. And so sort of that importance of that rapid involvement and rapid job search. And a couple of examples given there where, in particular, someone who maybe is experiencing some challenges with substance use, meeting them where they are and when they're motivated can even sometimes prevent them falling right back into that substance use or dealing drugs and getting their income from that pathway. So we had some really great examples.
Leah, you're muted.
Yes, I just saw that. Sorry. All right. Thank you. Kelsey, you're up next.
All right. So in our group, we heard from an individual who is currently an employment coach, but previously earlier in his life had been on the receiving end of employment services. And so he was able to share that kind of from both sides. He has seen how employment can be really, really important, especially giving that structure and that sense of purpose. We also talked about some of the things that were already brought up in the presentation about how employment can help decrease symptoms and increase self-esteem, that individuals appreciate having involvement in the process of obtaining a job rather than just kind of having something handed to them, as that can help raise that self-esteem as well. We also discussed the importance of that rapid engagement, and that whenever there are additional hoops to jump through to have access to those services, that can be a detriment. And then there was also some conversation about how having income can help facilitate other aspects of recovery, because whenever someone has more financial resources, that helps in accessing safe housing and being involved in the community and things like that. So it can really open the door to a lot of other areas of recovery as well.
Definitely. All right. I believe our last presenter or facilitator was Nancy. And you are on mute, just like I was.
I'm good. So I also had an excellent group. People are real excited about work as part of recovery. And we had people that have been in the business, I guess you would say, for 25, 30 years, and had other jobs that connected to this and are new in their jobs like for 3 years. And what people basically said was that the fact that it's an interdisciplinary team, that everybody should be talking about the employment as part of the recovery. We didn't see that years ago. And also a couple of people talked about how benefits really impacted whether or not, even with that interdisciplinary team, people didn't want to lose those because they had kind of fought so hard to get on them. So even with that, Misty talked about people didn't want to get off of benefits, but she had a couple of people that just took the leap and went into employment and are just and saw great success with it. So everybody was in favor of it with the recovery piece, and that basically everybody on the team needs to talk about work. So team, hopefully that I have reflected what you said, and I think we get another opportunity to speak. So thank you.
Yes, thank you all for sharing. Sounds like we had some great discussions. Now we're going to get back to Teresa Brandenburg's presentation. Maya? Are you able to
Yes.
hear? I don't hear any sound. Is it just me?
You guys weren't able to hear? Thanks for letting me know. I must have to share the computer sound again. I'm sorry about that.
That's okay.
Back it up. Thanks for letting me know. Okay, we're gonna redo it. Sorry, guys.
It's okay.
About recovery and employment. This is a person with a substance use disorder that is in recovery and employment, and how employment has affected her in a positive way. So we see how that, how her self-esteem's better. She's been working, everything's great. So we're going to move on and look at those benefits of working. So it does increase self-esteem. It increases self-confidence. Let's face it, when we learn a new task, how much does that increase our new confidence, self-confidence, that we're able to do that? And our self-esteem goes up. A lot of time, benefits of working is you have decreased substance uses. We had one client that we were working here in Kentucky that substance use was very much in the afternoon, and he told his employment specialist, "Get me a job in the afternoon, and I won't use that substance." So that's what we did, and that decreased his substance uses tremendously by just getting him a job during the times that he would normally use, because during that time is when he gets bored and he doesn't have any structure. It increases their independence, and you will also see a decrease in symptoms. So there's a decrease in hospitalizations, which saves money, which helps everybody. And here are some employee quotes that we got from some people in Indiana. And I just want y'all to look at them and read them. I thought they were great. Just because somebody has a label on them does not mean they can't be successful. And I think that is true. That is one thing that I hate to see somebody labeled as something. My mentor always said, soup cans have labels, people don't. So, that just not labeling somebody. And even if they do have what people consider a label, they can be successful. We have one person that now they own a home. Isn't that a great thing? They were able to go to work and buy a home. People with mental health diagnosis always hear the negative things. Never say no when they express their goals. And this is so important, because people with mental health diagnosis, a lot of times they're always told, no, you can't do this. No, you can't do this. No, that. No. This may be the one time when they hear, yes, you can go to work. Yes, you can do this. So always talk about their goals. Even if they're not realistic in your eyes, let's talk about and dig down deeper and find out why they're not, why they want those goals. That would be part of the assessment process, but don't dash their hopes. They always hear the negatives. Try to concentrate on the positives. And then I've heard people with schizophrenia don't get MBAs from my school, and people that were close to me said just be realistic. It doesn't matter. People with schizophrenia, they can get MBAs. If that's what they want to do and they can focus on it, that is what they can do, and that's one thing that we can work with them on. Don't just discount it because, nobody with schizophrenia can get that. And I wish people would focus on what you can do. You've heard me say that all along. Focus on what people can do, not what they can't do, because that's what an employment specialist is there for in your employment team, because that's what we want to do. Focus on on the positive and what they can do, not what they can't do. And here's a couple more, the last two. I knew I wanted to go to school and take care of myself. Employment has been very valuable. VR sent me through discovery, and now I have my MBA, and I work right alongside my former job coach. So isn't that awesome? So now they're giving back and working with people. Work on strengths and what people do well. Keep things positive. Work has changed my life by creating a routine and connecting me with other people. Many of my clients sleep a lot and never see anyone. So this person, by going to work, is able to connect with other people. But the client she works with, she sees that they sleep a lot and they don't ever see anyone. And that's not good. So it's very positive for you to be, and that's what I was talking about earlier, going out and being able to connecting there in society and having that social interaction is very important. All right, we're going to talk about the 8 principles of IPS. Focus on competitive employment. We talked about this. It's jobs that are regular jobs that are out in the community that anybody can apply for. It's not jobs set aside for people with disabilities. Eligibility is based on client choice. So as long as a client says that they want to work, they're eligible for IPS supported employment. Now, this is not eligible for VR supported employment. So they're still going to have to meet those VR criteria for VR to work with them too. But as far as IPS is concerned, eligibility is based on that client's choice. And then we already talked about integration with the rehabilitation and mental health teams, because you want that integration. You want to be able to talk and confer and be able to give that person the best possible supports in order to work. And then we're going to look at workers' preferences, like we talked about. It's what they want to do. It's not necessarily what we think they can do or what the labor market dictates. It's what they want to do. And we want to look at that and honor their preferences. Personalized benefits counseling. Now, this I can't stress enough, and it's very important, because if somebody's receiving benefits and that is their safety net, and that's what they look at, and maybe they're scared that they're going to not be successful at work, and are they going to keep their benefits and how it's going to work. So it's very important before somebody goes, they have that personalized benefits count, let them know how work is going to affect their check and what is going to happen. And then we already talked about the rapid job search. It's very fast. It happens within 30 days from the time the employment specialist first meets with that client. And job development. It's a systematic job development. So you're not going out and just putting in applications anywhere. That employment specialist is going out and meeting with employers weekly. They're going out and talking to an employer, and maybe the first time they're going to go out and just introduce themselves and say, "Hi, my name is Teresa Brandenburg, and I work for Acme Employment Services, and I help match people with jobs. And I would really like to learn a little bit more about what your business is and how you work it and how you hire. Is there a time maybe that I could come back when you have more time to talk?" And then hopefully they'll set up a time later on for you to come back and talk. And then after that, you would just pop in every so often and see somebody or see them. It may be that they may say, "Well, I got time to talk to you now." So if you're an employment specialist, you need to be ready for that too. But this is what IPS calls 3 cups of tea. So you start with just kind of a general information, and then you come back and learn more about that person. And then the next time you come in, you may talk about, "Well, I have somebody I think that might fit for your job. Could I talk to you about them?" So you're developing that relationship with that employer so that, they'll be more apt to hire. They may not want to hire somebody else, or they'll hire your person, but you're developing those relationships, and those relationships you can network from one employer to another. So maybe you're trying to get your foot in door at another employer, and this employment person, HR knows this person, so you can, maybe they can introduce you. So it's all kind of networking in there too, but you want to do that systematic job development. It's time unlimited and individualized supports. We talked about this. So as long as that person needs you, we expect you to provide those job supports. And they're all should be individualized, because not everybody's going to need the same thing. All right, we have a fidelity scale with IPS, and it was developed during all this study for that. And what this 25-item fidelity scale does, it makes sure that every program every IPS program looks like every other IPS program. So an IPS program in Indiana is going to look just like a program here in Kentucky, or an IPS program in Indiana should look just like an IPS program in New Zealand. New Zealand's look just like the program in Indiana. It's going to work that way. That's what fidelity means, is that everybody's doing things the same way. So the fidelity scale actually is broken into 3 sections. It looks at staffing, organization, and services. So it looks at what your staffing is, how your organization works within IPS, and at the services that you provide. And there's a manual. It's about 300 pages. It's pretty thick, that tells you everything about the fidelity review that you'd ever want to know. You can purchase them off the website, and I think it's about $50 for the whole thing there. Or they do have a free download, a PDF of it is a free download. You can download it and print it off yourself if you want to do that, if you're interested. Or you can just save it to your computer online and look at it that way. So here's what the Fidelity Scale does. It summarizes the basic characteristics of evidence-based supported employment. It's a roadmap for services. So this is going to tell you how to implement IPS and how IPS works. It really hones down and gets into those basic characteristics. It refers to the degree in which a particular program follows the key components of IPS. So it's 25 items, like I said. There's 5 components in each item. So you get a rating of 1 to 5 on each one, 1 being the worst, 5 being the best. And look at that. And we use it as a quality improvement tool for better outcomes and more jobs and to serve people better, not as a punishment. So what I like to tell people here is that we don't come in, we're not Medicaid, we're not coming in to recoup money. We're strictly coming in to look at your program and see what you do well, and then help you improve on the things that you're not doing so well. So it's strictly used as a quality of improvement tool, and it should be looked on as a good thing rather than a negative thing. Now, your IPS teams are usually, you have a supervisor and at least 2 employment specialists. This is per WestApp. Now, we have had some programs that start off with a supervisor and 1 employment specialist, and then when they grow the program, get up to 2 employment specialists. But it's really best if you can have those 2 employment specialists because they kind of feed off each other. They can go out and do job development with each other, or but you can't count the same in employment job development for each person. They have to do their own. But it gives them that support, and then they can bounce ideas off each other. So it really is better to have 2 employment specialists than just 1 in the supervisor. Then you're going to have a VR counselor. Now, what we've done here and what several other states have done is generally we have 1 VR counselor per agency that we work with, or per county that we work with. We may have an agency that works with a variety of counties that's going to work with each counselor within that county. So you're going to want to kind of set that up and have that VR counselor because they're an integral part of the team. Treatment teams, we already talked about this. They're a very part of the team because your employment specialists need to be embedded in those. And then you have an IPS straight trainer, which is what I do for Kentucky. But they help you kind of set up, implement the programs and be sure that you're doing it with fidelity. And then at first, the way we did it here in Kentucky is our IPS state trainers actually conducted the fidelity reviews until we grew so big that we needed to hire somebody to actually do fidelity reviews. And luckily, we do have now a fidelity monitor that does that. But so the state trainer does a variety of things and provides a lot of technical assistance. So here's the supervisor's role. You're going to conduct unit meetings weekly. So the supervisor is going to meet with their employment specialists at least once a week. And just at this time, they're going to talk about successes. They're going to talk about who's got jobs. They'll talk about job leads. They'll talk about if they're having any barriers. And hopefully the team can work and find and resolve those barriers. The supervisor will set goals for the teams at this point. The supervisor trains new team members. So once a new employment specialist comes on board, it's part of the supervisor's job to train that new team member in how to do IPS. And then attends a treatment teams at least once a quarter for every one of their employment specialists. So, if you got 2, it's not too bad. Sometimes if you got more than 2, then it gets a little tricky. And I believe WestStat says you have 1 full-time employment supervisor per 10 job coaches or employment specialists. They also do field monitoring. So they're going out into the field at least once a quarter with everybody on their team. And field mentoring can be doing anything from the assessment phase, which we use the career profile, which is part of IPS here, or whatever type of assessment, or it could be doing job development, or it could be doing supports, just going out into that field and working with that client, that employment specialist on what they need. And then they may do it more frequently if they have a new employment specialist or employment specialist that is struggling with something. The supervisor may go out more than once a quarter with that person. They do individual supervision. Generally, like I think WestStat says, it's once a quarter with everybody. Some of my providers do it once a month. Some may do it like once a week at the very beginning when they have new people in. Some may do it every other week, but generally once a month is what we see most done, except maybe when somebody is new coming on board and they may meet with them more frequently at that. They have a steering committee. This is going to help you implement IPS in your agency. So you want to have a steering committee, and the supervisor's role is going to lead that. And then, of course, what we already talked about, data collection. You saw in the previous slides what the information is that you have to collect, and that's very important. And we send that into WestStat once a quarter. So like at the end of each quarter, you would send that in to WestStat so they can add it onto theirs. And then as a liaison to everybody. Yeah, supervisor role is very important because they may be a liaison to the treatment team, to the executive director, to the executive leadership team, maybe over to VR. Just depends on what that person, what's needed.
Okay, we're going to pause now to take one last poll. Let's bring up the poll. So according to the IPS model, what percentage of time should employment specialists be out in the community?
So we've got about 75% of folks who have responded to the poll so far. So I'll give it just another moment for folks to get their last answers in. And remember to hit the submit button. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and end the poll.
Okay, thank you. Well, it looks like most people, 67% chose 75%. We have 18% chose 65%, and 15%, a lot of percentages here, chose 55. The answer is 65%. Now that's at least 65%. So there's nothing wrong with if you're going to be able to get out there and spend 75% of your time in the field. It may sound like a lot, but in my experience, and I'm sure in yours as well, we know that every minute you're sitting at your desk, you're losing out on a job developing opportunity or catching up with some of the people you work with. Now, I know that sometimes when I've been on fidelity reviews, I have some employment specialists talk about how hard it is to spend that much time in the community. And then part of the review, we would just discuss different activities they could be doing, like discovery, meeting the individuals they work with for coffee, or maybe taking a walk with them at break time or checking on a new employment lead. Up next, Teresa is going to discuss different elements of the employment specialist role.
The employment specialist role. Now, employment specialist is very important. They perform all phases of IPS. So they're going to start with intake, assessment, job development, outcome, and long-term supports. That's going to be all done by one employment specialist. We're not going to break it up in pieces and say this person does the assessment, this person does job development, and this person does long-term supports. It's that same employment specialist which have continuity does all phases. And they have to spend 65% of their time out in the community. Now, this has been well validated over the control trials that they've got to spend 65% of their time out in the community in order to get people employed. And if they're not spending 65% of their time out in the community, they're probably not going to reach their employment goals. Now, it is a little bit different with COVID, and we've had to do some interesting things, but we have employment specialists that are reaching out to employers through Zoom, through phone calls now, and doing that. But when COVID's over with, it's 65% of their time out in the community. With a minimum, and during this time out in the community, they do a minimum of 6 face-to-face employer contacts per week. And that for it to count as one of these 6 employer contacts per week, they has to be with somebody that has hiring authority. So they may go in and talk to somebody at an employer, but if they don't have hiring authority, it doesn't count. They have to talk to somebody with hiring authority. But that doesn't say they can't get some very good information about the business from that person that doesn't have hiring authority. So it's a good thing to talk to them, but you just can't count it. And then employment specialists provide on and off jobs the supports, because not everybody's going to disclose, and it's that person's choice whether they disclose or not. And as an employment specialist, you're going to have a lot of conversations about disclosure with the person throughout the time that you're working with them, because it's not just a one-time thing. Where when they go in for fidelity reviews, they want to look and be sure that you've talked to them at least twice about disclosure. But it's very good to talk about it during the assessment, and then right before you start job development. And then maybe if job development's a little hard or something, you may want to talk to them more about it then, and just go from there. But just keep in mind, you've got to talk to you. Disclosure is very important. But so on and off the job support. So if they disclosed, you may provide some on the job supports. If they haven't disclosed, you're going to strictly look at off the job supports. The employment specialist role also, as an employment specialist, you're going to attend weekly treatment team meetings. And we kind of already talked about this. So they're going to be embedded in that treatment team and be a very integral part of that team. That's what we want to see. And they attend those meetings weekly. They may provide education and support to employers also about somebody with a disability, or how to support somebody, different things, whatever that employer needs pertaining to that employee. And we want them to do timely intervention. So if you see something that's going awry, don't wait until something totally blows up. We want those to step in right away. As if somebody loses their job, also, then your employment specialist is expected to contact them within 2 days of the employment specialist hearing about the job loss. Now, it may not be 2 days from the job loss, but it's going to be, they should contact them within 2 days once the employment specialist hears about the job loss. And as a state, you should have a state trainer. And as a state trainer, this is what some of the things they'll provide. Technical assistance. This is a big part of my job, is technical assistance. And it's to help implement programs. It's programs that are already started if they got any questions. If they, sometimes with new staff, we'll go out with them and we'll do field mentoring as well as the supervisor. It's just anything that has to do with IPS supported employment, and there's a question, the trainer's there for the person. We do mentoring with the supervisors. We'll attend team meetings. Maybe we wouldn't do it every week, but maybe once a quarter or so. They may, once a program getting started, we may attend more than maybe a couple times a month to get it started. Maybe attend your first one to assist with it. Conducts statewide supervisors meeting. We do this once a quarter. Before COVID, we did it once a quarter. Now we're doing by Zoom, and we would do it for a day during that quarter. So it would be like from 10 to 3. So now with COVID, we do it about once a month, and we have a training component to it. And it's usually from 10 to 12. So it's about a 2-hour span now. And then we have fidelity reviews that we do. And this is done, it starts once a program's up and running and they have about 6 months of data, that's when the fidelity reviews would start. And then it depends on how often that the state wants to do the fidelity reviews. In Kentucky, generally what we do is if somebody gets a fair review, we'll do it. We'll go back in 6 months. A good review will return after a year. And if they get exemplary, it'll be about 18 months. Now, I just gave y'all those things. So let me tell you what they all mean. A fair is from 74 to 99 is a fair fidelity. Good fidelity is from 100 to 114 or 115. And then from 116 to 125 is exemplary. So that's what anything below 74 is considered not supported employment. So you don't want to get there. But, most programs will start out, usually the first time they may get a fair and then they'll move on up after that. So it's a very good tool for growing a program. Okay, here's the best implementation process or practice. It should be jointly brought into the state or region by behavioral health and vocational rehabilitation, because it really takes both of those agencies working together. Funding is a big part of it, because behavioral health doesn't have a lot of funding to support the program for the individuals, but VR, because of their role is to assist people with disabilities to go to work, does have some upfront funding that they can help with for them if the person qualifies for VR services. So it's very important for VR and behavioral health to bring it into the state together. The state should have an implementation team that's going to meet regularly about implementing this and how. We had a state implementation team that met for probably 6 months or more, 6 to 8 months before we ever started into the program. And then our implementations team still meets regularly. We meet about once a month to discuss things that are going on and anything that needs to be done. And we also do training programs. We usually have an annual conference in the spring, and then we usually will have several different training programs throughout the year for programs. Agencies have got to believe in the value of work and that, work is a benefit to the person. And people get jobs. That's what it is. People will get jobs with this. And you have to have buy-in from the top down. If the executive director and the executive team doesn't support it, it's really hard for that program to get started and get any traction. Now, here's a quote from the CEO of Communicare. It's one of our community mental health centers. They were one of the first programs that started in this. And this is what Dan Simpson said. He's their CEO. This program is a win-win. There's no way not to win with this program. We're improving people's lives. What better way to get back on your feet than to get a job? The program sells itself. And Communicare has done a wonderful, wonderful job. They're probably the only community mental health center that is in all 8 of their counties. And they're separated into 2 different programs right now. So they do an excellent job. And, I depend on a lot of times I'll be calling Sheila, what do you do about this? Or how's this going? So, it's really, they've been really beneficial and have solved a lot of problems along the way. One of the things I think is really cool that they do is that they also have an incentive program for their employment specialists. So they give back so much money when an employment specialist reaches a certain amount of billing, and I think it's either $72,000 or $75,000 a year, then they get a bonus. That's a really good thing to kind of show how much they value their staff. And with that, by doing little things like that, they keep staff with that incentive. It shows that they care and they value staff. All right, here are some common challenges. Funding. Funding's always a challenge, no matter what you're doing these days. It's always funding. There are several ways that you can fund things, and sometimes you can braid funding. Some of the things that we've done here in Kentucky is like we partnered with VR, so VR pays the upfront cost of the supported employment, and then some of the long-term funding is picked up by that agency, where behavioral health actually some of the money that is divided out to all the community mental health centers here that they get is earmarked. Part of that is earmarked for an evidence-based supported employment program. So some of that is used for the long-term supports. But after about a year, you can do what we call step-down supports. If the person's doing well on the job, hadn't had any issues, then you look at the step-down support. So you may transition that person off the caseload onto that treatment team that the employment specialist is still attending. So they would hear if there's any issues going on with that person, but kind of letting the case manager and the clinician kind of handle more of the support role at that point in time. But at any time if the person loses their job or if they start having issues on the job, then they would go right back on that person's caseload. So there's a lot of different ways of funding. One of the things that we've done to support in Kentucky also is that when VR was not bringing down their full match of money, then and WIOA came out, there were demonstration grants that could be done. So at that point in time, if an agency could put up so much money, then they could draw down some of that federal money, and that could be used to help fund that program. There's also the Medicaid waiver programs for those that are receiving SSI or qualify for it. Sometimes you can do funding under that to help with the long-term supports and with the funding of supported employment. Other ways that we've had programs, not necessarily IPS programs here in Kentucky, but we've had other programs that have gotten funding is through state and local means, or, you know, they may have some state grants that are going through something, or that somebody may get a federal grant. We had an IPS program when we first started out that was able to get a grant from a health foundation that helped them get started. So, you know, looking into grants and stuff is a great thing for funding. Another common challenge is zero exclusion. And this is because we've been so ingrained that if they're not medication compliant, if they're not going to therapy, then they shouldn't get a job. But with IPS, it doesn't matter if they're doing all that. If they want to work, then they are eligible for IPS. Now, this is where sometimes VR and IPS kind of collide. So it may take some relaxation of some of VR's policies on this, but that's where when this is brought into Kentucky, that needs to be a conversation that will need to be had at the implementation team level about that. There's got to be buy-in from the top down. Like I said, if the executive director and the executive team do not support it, it's very hard to get it implemented with fidelity. Staffing is very important, and keeping staff, because if you have constant turnover, it's really hard to get your footing. And that's always been a problem with supported employment, at least here in Kentucky, is having that turnover. And that's where I was talking about the CEO of Communicare had supported them into providing those incentives for the employment specialists, because they're not the best paid in the agency. But being able to work towards those incentives and getting a bonus, you know, that helps. And that shows that they're valued. So, you know, that helps with staffing and helps with turnover. So that may be something that if program out there may think about if they can do that. And becoming self-sustaining is always a challenge. Now, I will say this, Communicare has become self-sustaining. Their program pays for everything. They pay for their staff. They pay for the bonuses. So, you know, it can be done, but it is a difficult position, and you really have to work at it and keep it going. It's not an easy thing, but it can be done. And then fidelity. A lot, you know, we're not expecting you to come out here and start with exemplary fidelity. What I expect for a new program really is just fair fidelity. Because you're just getting started, and you know, it's only 6 months, so you're really just kind of feeling your way around. So, but once you get that first fidelity review under your belt, and we look at things that we can improve on, then you work with that. You do an action plan, and you work with your trainer to improve those areas. And so that the next time the fidelity review comes around, you'll either get a much better score or even to good. And I've seen programs jump from fair to exemplary. So, you know, it's not impossible. And as we come to the end of the program, I want to give y'all some questions to think about. And then maybe we'll be able to come back and talk about them later. But think about, what are your funding gaps in implementing IPS supported employment? What would they be? What do they look like? And then the second question would be, besides funding, because we know that funding is always an issue, what would it take for your agency to make that move to IPS? And then when you make that move to IPS, what was going to be your first step? And then what is the easiest part of IPS to implement? What do you think would be the easiest thing to implement? And what do you think is going to be the most difficult? So those are some questions I just want you to think about about IPS and as you're thinking about implementing it. And we will come back together at a later date maybe and talk about it and see if we can help put some of those questions to rest.
Okay, well, that was the end of Teresa Brandenburg's presentation. But we're going to go ahead and take a moment for another small group discussion. Same rules apply from before, very casual, same facilitator taking notes and presenting. But we're going to discuss a couple of the questions that Teresa posed. We're going to take the middle ones. Besides funding, what would it take your agency to make the move to IPS? And what would be your first step? So Maya is going to put us into our rooms. Remember, you have to accept. Okay, welcome back. How did the discussions go? I know that my group, we talked about both questions, but we're going to first get started with the first facilitator. Maya, can you tell us about your group discussions?
Sure, yeah. I thought it was really productive. We talked about how important it would be that everybody is at the table and talking about that top to bottom investment of everybody moving forward with the IPS model being really important. And then also working with VR to make sure that we can have everybody have similar goals and working together to meet expectations. So I think that teamwork, collaboration, and bringing everybody to the table were really the big points that folks had.
Yeah, great, thank you. In my group, we talked about fidelity being kind of intimidating and challenging. And then, you know, how would you bring that to your executive leadership and say, you know, we really need to implement it to the fullest, not just use certain parts. Because their program, they said that they love IPS. And so pulled out components they thought they could go ahead and meld into what they were already doing. And so looking for that push to talk to leadership. So we talked about that. We also talked about employment specialists, not only at being a challenge in rural areas, trying to find people and not take it away from other parts of the of their agency, but also the lack of turnover that happens, and then making sure you find the right person. I was able to share that if you go to ipsworks.org, Westat has, in their library, has a ton of documents, and one of them is job descriptions. And so that can help kind of find the best person out there. We also talked about the first step would be just really looking at all of the literature, the best practices, and how to connect that with what the agency is already doing. Okay, Teresa, would you like to talk about what your group discussed?
Sure, yes. We had, I think, the main initial item or items that would need to be worked through is the pairing that expectation, that best practice of being out in the community 65% with expectations that the agency has of interaction, which is tied to billable time. So the example given was that's 55%. So, you know, is there overlap there, or you know, how do we make sure historically that time out in the community is not in and of itself billable time? So how do you kind of still meet that billable time and meet both of those expectations? And then there were actually a couple of questions that I'll pose quickly, and then we can probably debrief. I think one is just, can we provide a link for the manual? Teresa mentioned there's a manual online that can be a 300-page document that we could maybe share for folks that are interested in learning more, and then figuring out exactly what would it take to implement it. And then also some questions around clarification of those designated supervisor and a minimum of 2 employment specialists. Is that 100% IPS, or, like, for example, could that supervisor be split and cover a couple of different programs? And depending on the answer to that, there would maybe need to be some staffing, structural shifting to work through in order to move forward.
Yes, to meet fidelity, I believe, and I don't have it like right in front of me, but I believe it is this IPS supervisor could supervise up to 10 employment specialists. And so maybe they're not all those IPS, all of them are doing IPS. There is a percentage they have to be, and I believe it's 50%, but I could go back and answer that question. But then to answer your second question, IPSworks.org, again, is through Westat, and I just pulled them up because I just had my training, but they have your fidelity manual and they have the supported employment manual. I didn't realize that they just updated in 2019. So if you have these manuals already, whether you download them or purchase them, that they did update them in 2019, and they did change something on the fidelity scale just a little bit. So.
And I just put the web address link to the manual in the chat.
Thank you. And you're up next, Kelsey.
All right, thank you. So we discussed both questions as well, and there was a lot of agreement in our group about the need for education as something that's needed to move towards IPS within the agency, specifically for management and division directors to increase their buy-in or obtain their buy-in. And also then so that management can educate the treatment teams about, why an employment specialist is being embedded in their team and things like that. Another thought was seeing other organizations be successful in implementing IPS would be a good way to move in that direction, especially within Indiana, since we may have different circumstances than other states or areas. Also along the lines of education, looking at the fiscal impact as far as, bottom line, cost savings, those sorts of things, because that is often kind of the final straw for management in moving one direction or another. And then finally, there was some discussion about people who are determining eligibility within the VR system receiving some education about the SMI population and how the disability manifests, so that there is a better understanding there and that's reflected in the eligibility assessments. Also recognizing that order of selection is a factor that comes into play and can pose challenges at times. And then also educating clients as well, because this can be a different approach than what people are used to. And so helping clients understand, especially things like the zero exclusion and rapid engagement may not be what they're used to on their end of receiving services. I'll share as well, I did mention in our breakout room on the WestStat site, that ipsworks.org, somewhere on the site, and I can try and find the link to it. There is an agency self-assessment for readiness for IPS that can help look at those foundational building blocks and kind of how close or far away you may be as an agency.
Okay, thank you. Nancy? Yes. Oh, there you go.
I'm trying to control my mouse to get to my mute. So piggybacking off of Kelsey a little bit, it's the education piece, how to go from the employment specialist to the supervisor to the next supervisor to get to the top dog on educating about IPS and the efficacy of IPS, and that there may be a systems change necessary to do that. So the buy-in was a large part of our discussion and how to do that. It took a couple of, not tangents really, because it was still involved with buy-in, but things like, well, obviously VR's got buy-in at the top because Teresa's sitting right here with us, but it's how do we make sure that everybody in the VR program has that same buy-in and supports that to happen. Also, some of the community mental health centers do not have employment programs right now and may not have a relationship with VR at all. People, a person who used to work in the community mental health center, says we never talked about VR with our customers. So does that still exist? And if it does, how do we do that piece of education? Another piece of education, again, kind of at a local collaboration piece, was how does the treatment team and VR educate the community about people that have a mental health diagnosis? We see things in the news that could be scary, but how can we work with the community and then, work with the community on, hey, people can work, and how to do that. I think to close it up, it's a cultural shift that VR would be part of the team. They're kind of looked at right now as the funding stream for this to happen and not seen necessarily as a person who can help with this. And those that don't have the employment services, you know, how can we work with them to really get to the employment is part of recovery. And Kelsey, that was put on your plate. So, but no, I mean, it's really all of ours. But, you know, how do we get to the places that at least on the surface don't even look like employment is part of the discussion as that recovery?
Yeah.
So hopefully, team, I've covered it for you.
Yeah, thank you.
So.
And Teresa Colazar, I did look up, and the ideal situation is for them to not supervise more than 10 employment specialists. However, if they're only supervising 4, then they are allowed to have reserved 50% of their time to non-IPS supervision.
Helpful, thank you.
You're welcome. Sorry, now we're back to Kelsey.
Yes, and I did also put in the chat the link for the agency readiness assessment as well. So now that you have learned about the IPS model, I imagine you may be wondering what comes next. So first and foremost, we want to continue to create awareness that employment is a tool for recovery rather than an outcome from it. And as Nancy said, you know, DMHA has a role to lead that as well. But in all of your organizations and agencies, we encourage you to spread that message also. So we do want that awareness to permeate at the state level and the local provider level. We want to get better at helping people get work and to make sure that the funding structures support those services. We want to make sure that everyone who needs services can access them. And as part of the Voice Project, we are launching a website that will have a video training series and other resources for a wide variety of audiences related to employment for individuals with a mental health diagnosis. So we encourage you to take advantage of these resources. We will make sure that in the follow-up to this webinar, you will receive information about the website address and the video training series. So in closing, we thank you for your time, for your participation in the smaller group discussions, and your interest in learning more about IPS. We so appreciate Teresa Brandenburg for her facilitation and all the work she's done with us throughout this project. We are so thankful to Maya and Leah with PCG for their facilitation and having a pretty seamless technical presentation. We know that this can be rare sometimes. So we hope that you move on from this training thinking about how we can collectively do better serving this population and elevate the conversation to include employment as an integral part of wellness. So please feel free to reach out to Teresa or me with any comments or questions you may have. We do also ask that you take a moment to complete the training evaluation survey. A link for that is being put in the chat box and will also be emailed out to you. So we really value your feedback and welcome any input that you have on the training or on moving towards IPS in a broader sense. So again, thank you so much, and everyone have a fantastic rest of the afternoon.